Thank you. Thank you so much, Reverend Stanley, and thanks to all of you. What a delight it is to be here. I've been looking forward so much to meeting many of you and to see all of you to talk about this important subject in my life and in fact, an important subject in the life of everybody, which is how we can live better, happier lives as Christian people and to spread that gospel of joy and happiness to others, because that's the most magnetic thing when we're meeting people for the first time or meeting people all throughout their lives and ours. So it turns out that being a Christian is not a guarantee of being happy all the time. That's why I study the science of happiness and teach it at Harvard University and speak about it and write about it. Now, it turns out that it's not the easiest thing for me either, as a matter of fact. That's the reason I write about it, is because I want it. I teach a class at the Harvard Business School called Leadership and Happiness. It's the most oversubscribed class at the Harvard Business School. Strange, isn't it? People ask me what I do for a living. I say, I teach at the Harvard Business School. And they say, what, accounting, finance, supply chain management, something practical like that? I say, no, I teach happiness. And they think I'm lying. No, I'm not lying. I teach the science of happiness, and the reason that they're so interested in it, the students are, is because they're getting to the last semester of their last year of their MBA program. They're on average 28 years old, and they're starting to figure out that the world has sold them a bill of goods. If you get into Harvard, you'll be happy. If you get these skills, you'll be ready to go out into the world, make a lot of money, and then you'll be happy. And they're starting to think that maybe that's not the secret to happiness. And my class is kind of the last chance saloon on their way out of Harvard. So I have 180 students in the class. I have 400 on the waiting list, and there's even a secret illegal Zoom link they think I don't know about. Sometimes they'll ask, Professor, how did you get interested in this? And you know, it's like anybody else, I want to be happy. But I had one particular experience that set me on this path. That made me think I wanted to dedicate my career as a social scientist to this subject of happiness. It happened about 10 years ago, as a matter of fact. I was doing what I always do, which is traveling around, talking about ideas. It's a joy. I do about 175 speeches a year outside of the university. At the time, I was actually running a company in Washington, D.C., a big think tank called the American Enterprise Institute. And traveling back and forth across the country. And you know, being the president of a think tank, it sounds fancy, like you're thinking in a tank. It's mostly raising money, which is what you do when you run a nonprofit. So that's what I was doing mostly. And one night, I was on a flight coming back from Los Angeles to Washington Dulles Airport. And I was thinking, I have to tell you a little bit about my own life. I was running a company and it was going well. Each year, I would try to make the company a little bit bigger. I would try to have a little bit more success than I did the year before. But I realized that I didn't have any idea how this story was going to end up. I didn't have an ending in mind. Do it a little bit more, do it a little bit bigger, and then at some point, stop. And then what? Golf? I don't know how to golf. I don't want to golf. I want a better ending to the story, quite frankly, and I didn't have one. So I set about deciding I'm going to find the end of the story. And this is what was going on in my life. I was praying about it a lot, but I wasn't coming up with any solutions. Okay, so back to the airplane. I'm sitting on this airplane, and I overhear a conversation right behind me. It was dark, so I couldn't see who it was. Now, I'm not trying to eavesdrop. That would be indiscreet. But I have to tell you, I'm a behavioral social scientist by training. My laboratory is overheard conversations. So if you're behind me at the Starbucks and you're confessing to somebody that your beloved has broken your heart, keep your voice down. Might be my next book. So I hear a couple. I can tell by their voices it's a man and a woman. I can tell by their voices that they're elderly, 80s. But here's the thing that really caught my attention. I couldn't quite make out the husband's words. He was sort of mumbling. And the wife's voice, incredibly penetrating right through the seats. He mumbles and she says, "Oh, don't say it would be better if you were dead." Whoa. Now I'm all ears. This is something pretty interesting. He mumbles a little bit more and she says, it's not true that nobody remembers you or loves you anymore. And this is going on for 20 minutes. Clearly, this is a disconsolate gentleman, and his wife, who loves him, is trying to make him feel better by telling him lies, which I hope my wife will do at some point. And it wasn't helping, obviously. Anyway, this goes on for a long time, and I'm listening. I'm thinking, who is this guy? Now, as a social scientist, I should be able to put together kind of a portrait of him. So I'm thinking, this is somebody who probably didn't live up to his potential, didn't get the education that he wanted, didn't start the business that he desired, didn't get the promotions, make the money, whatever, and now it's too late, and he's disappointed with his life. Made perfect sense to me. Okay. Their conversation ends. I go back to work on my laptop, and about an hour later, we land in Washington, D.C. We all stand up, the lights go on, and I'm kind of curious. So I turn around to get a look, and it's one of the most famous men in the world. This is somebody you all know. Discretion prevents me from telling you his identity and lawsuits. But here's the thing. I thought to myself, that can't be right. That can't be right. Why? Because this guy's done 20 times more with his life than I'll ever do with mine. He's rich, he's famous, and the world says that's how you get happier as you get toward the end of your life. You do everything, you bust your pick, you get success, you bank it, you die happy. So either that model's busted or he's busted. Something's wrong. I thought to myself, man, and this is coming at a very delicate point in my life because I'm thinking about my own life as I'm getting older. What am I trying to do? I do not want to be in my 80s saying that to my long-suffering wife, Esther, that I might as well be dead. So what changes am I gonna make? Study yourself, professor. I said to myself, I went home and I told my wife, I said, honey, I had this really crazy experience. I was on the plane and I heard this guy. She said, who was it? And I told her, and she said, huh? And then I told her what he said, and she said, that's terrible. And I said, yeah, but I'm afraid that's gonna be me. And she said, so do something about it. Don't you have a PhD? I said, yeah. She said, use it for something useful. For once. So I set about doing a research project that I'm gonna tell you about today, which was a research project into the rest of my life. And what I found changed my life. It changed my decisions. It set me on a new trajectory. It made my life much better because I think I cracked the code on how I can live my best life and not wind up with disappointment, not wind up feeling like my best years are behind me. I can actually enjoy my life more and more and more as I get older. And I'm gonna tell you what I found, but one warning, it doesn't come naturally. Here's a funny thing about the science of happiness that I teach my students. Mother Nature, oh, she's great, but she really only has two goals for your life: survival and passing on your genes. Your happiness, that's your responsibility. That's the divine path, not the animal path. We're given free will to make decisions in our lives, and if we don't use that free will, we will chase idols all the way down. And Mother Nature is just fine with that. So what I'm gonna tell you today is the way for your life to get better, but I'm gonna tell you some things that are not gonna come naturally to you. They're gonna require a lot of prayer and a lot of effort and a lot of help from your family and friends. But if you do it, it's gonna work. Okay, now, when I started this research project, which I thought was just gonna be personal, I was just gonna keep a bunch of notes and change my life and use my skills and maybe have some success, my wife found my notes and said, you should publish this as a book. That's the reason this is a real book. Made a book into the world on the basis of that. When I started that research project, I started the same way that I always do research, which is I got a kind of a lay of the land. I went out there and I looked at data on millions of individuals to ask this question: on average, do people get happier or unhappier as they get older? Right? Just that question, just on average. Now, there's all kinds of ways to measure well-being, all kinds of ways that we measure life satisfaction, and they're pretty good, as a matter of fact. So I used the best data I could possibly find, and I found a pretty pronounced pattern on what actually happens. Now think to yourself, Do people, as they go through their 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s, do they tend to get happier or unhappier? What do you think? I ask my students this. On the first day of class, I always ask my 28-year-old students, that's the average age, think about yourself 10 years from now. You're 38. You gonna be happier or unhappier than now? They all say happier. They all think they're gonna be happier. They're optimists. I mean, they have a lot of student debt. They have to be optimists. And then I ask why. I mean, maybe 5% don't think they're gonna be happier. Those are like the French students, right? They're in the back smoking, you know? And but the vast majority happier. And I say, why? And I cold call them. I pick them out of the crowd and I say, why do you think you're gonna be happier in 10 years? And they always give me the same explanation. Good things are gonna happen. The things I want are gonna happen. I'm gonna get the job I want. I'm gonna have the money that I want. The career, the success. Actually, the family. Here's the funny thing about my students. They'll come to my office hours, close the door. They say they're there to talk about their paper. It's a pretext. What do you really want to talk about? Professor, you know what I really want? I know what they want. But they tell me, I want to get married. I want to have kids. I want to have a family. It's like it's illicit information. It's like a secret. Crazy. That's what we want because we want love. I want to find my religious faith. That's what they want because that's the serious business of life. So they think when they're 38 that they're going to have more of the things that they want and they're going to be happier. I say, okay, plausible. Now, what about 48, 10 years later? Happier or unhappier? They think about it and they say, I think a little happier because more of same. Then I say, what about when you're 78? And they say, I don't want that. I say, well, what's wrong with being 78? They can't tell me. It just doesn't sound like fun. When you're 28, being 78 sounds bad. Okay. So I say to the students, what you're telling me is you think your happiness is gonna go up and up and up and up and up, and then it's gonna max out at some point, then it's gonna start back down again. They say, yeah, that sounds right. That's depressing, but that's what they think. I say, okay, let's look at the data. I have data on millions of people from all over the world, from India, China, Sub-Saharan Africa, from South America, all over Europe. And I show them data on 416,000 American and British citizens. This one sample I like to show them. And it's just the opposite of what they think. On average, people tend to diminish slightly in their happiness from their early 20s all the way to their early 50s, year after year after year. Not a lot. Not a lot. On a 1 to 10 scale of self-evaluated life satisfaction, most people are between about a 7 and a 9 over the course of their lives, how they rate the quality of their lives. And they usually go from in that period from about 8.5 to low 7s. Not a lot, but it's noticeable. They think they're gonna get happier, and usually they don't. Now, this is not alarming, actually. It looks alarming to them, but it actually isn't because happiness is really 3 things. Happiness is a combination of enjoyment and satisfaction and purpose. That's what happiness is. And over your 20s and 30s and 40s, a lot of you know, life is complicated. So you're trading off your enjoyment for purpose. When you've got kids at home and you've got a career and a job and a commute, that's complicated and your enjoyment falls, but your purpose rises. Purpose is a long-term happiness play. Enjoyment is a short-term happiness strategy. And you're trading the two off. And so the result is, in this moment, life satisfaction is tricky in your 20s and 30s and 40s. It's not terrible, but it's going the wrong direction. They don't like that, but then something happens. The big majority of people in their early 50s, they change directions and they start getting happier. Most people from their early 50s until about 70 get significantly happier. Okay, I tell my students it's kind of a bad news, good news story. The bad news, I say, is you're getting unhappier. The good news is I'm getting happier. And then a weird thing happens. Around age 70, there's a shelf. It looks like in the data that you get to a certain happiness level and that's what you get until the end of your life. That turns out to be an illusion. When you look at the real data, that's an average between 2 groups. It turns out the real population breaks into one group that keeps getting happier all the way to the end and another group that starts back down again until the end of life. Equal-sized groups, 50-50. Now, I'm gonna take a wild guess at which group you wanna be in. You wanna make the decisions early in life that get you into the upper branch, and so you can avoid the lower branch. Now my research project is getting more interesting because now I know what the real question is. The question is how to get on the upper branch. My first assumption, of course, is that you're naturally gonna, if you're successful and you're a striver and you're hardworking, that you're naturally gonna be on the upper branch. You achieve a lot, you do a lot, that's great. You'll be on the upper branch. You won't be disappointed. But the guy on the plane, doing way more than me, total striver, very successful, lower branch. Is he an outlier? Is he an aberration? Or is there more to the story? I started looking into that, and it turns out that my assumption was wrong. Most of the people who are most successful in their working years, they tend to be on the lower branch, not on the upper branch. I didn't want to find that. Why? Because I'm a striver. I work hard. I try to be good at what I do. So do you. And the die is cast. I can't just say, okay, I'm going to be a slacker from now on so I can get that upper branch. I am who I am. I'm trying to lead a life of excellence and apostolate. That's what I think God wants me to do with my life. But I don't want it to cost me in my happiness. So what do I do about that? Now, first question though. Why is it that strivers tend to wind up on the lower branch? It doesn't make sense at first, but when you think about it, it kind of does. There's wonderful research conducted at the University of Texas at Austin by two social psychologists, a married couple, Carol and Charles Holohan is their name, and they do work on what they call the burden of high achievement. What's that? That's the situation in which people who are identified as hard workers and strivers and excellent before they're young adults, they tend to wind up more disappointed by their life when they're elderly. Why? Because when you self-identify, when your identity is number one, when you're 15 and 16, you usually have really exigent parents. Work hard, play by the rules, get the A's, get the jobs, get into the best colleges. You start to see yourself as an excellence machine. And when that party ends, which it must for everybody, is pretty disappointing. And that's why if you see yourself as number one at 20, you're most likely to be disappointed with your life when you're 80. It's hard to live up to your mother's expectations. It's even harder to live up to your own. That's number one. Here's the second reason. You're gonna know when your big professional party is over. That's the law of what we call psycho-professional gravitation. What goes up must come down. You find that CEOs who have the most power when they're working tend to be most depressed when they retire because of the contrast. There's literally a neurophysiological change in the brain of successful people that when they step away, they get depressed because of the contrast. So this kind of makes sense, doesn't it? That's why, fellow strivers, it's so hard to see your life change. Now I know what the real research project is, which is how do I avoid that? How do I lead my best life? How do I lead a life that I think is the potential that God wants me to follow and also be happy? How do I do it? Funny thing, when you read biographies of great women and men, they always enumerate the accomplishments of the entrepreneur, of the general, of the celebrity, whatever it is. They never ask this question, did the person die happy? They never ask that. It turns out that often the answer is no. Let me give you one case. Charles Darwin. If you had a list of the 3 greatest natural scientists of the past 500 years, Darwin would be on that list. Maybe number 1. He changed the way that we understand the natural world. And the way he did it was quite amazing. He was actually the naturalist aboard a sailing ship called the Beagle. He was the resident scientist. He got the job when he was 22, young guy. For the next 5 years, sailed around the world getting natural plant and animal specimens, sending them back for analysis in Europe. Came back at age 27 with an idea of what connected the fossil record with the animals and plants that we see today. It was, of course, the theory of evolution, the theory of natural selection. That made him overnight the most famous scientist in the world at age 27. Huge celebrity, rich, famous, going to every party, giving lectures all over the place. And he dined out on that fame for 25 years. It was wonderful. He loved it. But then a thing happened to Charles Darwin when he was in his early 50s. All his progress scientifically stopped abruptly. Here's the reason. He had started a whole field of study. And all the young people that were doing the research in his field, they had more ability in mathematics and statistics than he did, and they overtook him, and he could no longer keep up with his own research. He couldn't even read the research in the field that he had started, and he was left behind like an old newspaper. From his early 50s until he died in his 70s, he never did one more piece of research that he considered to be original, and that's all he cared about. He was deeply depressed. He felt like a fraud and a charlatan when he died at 73. He even wrote that to his best friend. He said, "I'm sad because I can't do research anymore, the only thing that I value." He needed better priorities in life, I'll tell you, but I get it because I see it again and again and again and again in the lives of the most accomplished people in the world. What happened to him? What happened to Darwin? He could have been the man on the plane, by the way, and this is a common occurrence. Now, I know I'm depressing you at this point, but it gets better, I promise. First, let's explain what happened to Darwin. Let's explain what happened to the man on the plane, because when we understand that particular problem in all of our lives, then we can find the solutions to that problem. They were both on the wrong branch of the happiness curve. They were headed downward. Why? Well, number one, they were on the wrong curve. Let me tell you what that means. I have data on scientists and people who are very accomplished in business and physicians and lawyers, and there's a funny thing that you find. What makes you really good at what you do gets better and better and better, and you become more and more successful through your 20s and 30s, but then it tends to max out in your late 30s. Your ability to do what made you really good at what you do, it tends around 40, 39, 40, it tends to get to its maximum level. It's a strange thing. When I look at Nobel Prize winning scientists, for example, in physiology, chemistry, and physics, you find that on average, they do the work that earns them the prize at age 39. They win the prize in their 60s or 70s, but they did the work in their late 30s. 39 is the modal age. People who have world-changing patents in science, 39. It's a funny thing about age 39. The likelihood of doing Nobel Prize-winning research at 70 is the same as it is at age 20, which is 0%. When I saw that, I thought, what about other fields? I looked at surgeons. They tend to do their most innovative work in their late 30s. Lawyers, litigators, late 30s. Even when you get outside of these areas, professors, they do their best research in their late 30s. Artists do their most innovative work in their late 30s. And again, air traffic controllers, electricians, fill in the blanks. Anything where you use your creativity, you use your knowledge, you use your brain, late 30s is when you do your best original work. So I thought to myself, well, that actually explains some things. Most people have their first kind of professional burnout phase in their mid-40s. Why? Because humans are made for progress. Now, when you're mid-40s and you're past that point of maximum excellence, nobody else is going to notice, just you. But when you're not making progress, it hurts a lot. It doesn't feel good at all. I have a dentist who's a great dentist in Needham, Massachusetts, where I live outside Boston. Best dentist. She's 43. She's recently stopped taking patients on Fridays. It's funny, I said, why don't you take patients on Fridays? She says, I'm golfing on Fridays. I said, but I thought you loved being a dentist. She said, I used to, but something changed a couple of years ago. I don't love it as much as I used to. I said, well, do you love golf? She says, no, I hate golf. But maybe I'll learn to love it when I get good at it. She has a desire to make progress. That's how we're wired. God makes us to make progress. God doesn't make us to stagnate. And yet there's this feeling of stagnation that people typically get when they get into their 40s, and that leads to burnout. Sort of bad news. It turns out that pattern was described in the 1960s and 1970s by a social psychologist by the name of Raymond Cattell, British social psychologist, the world's leading expert in human intelligence. Now, we think of intelligence as IQ, raw cognitive horsepower. That's not the most interesting way to see it. Raymond Cattell believed that intelligence is relative strengths, cognitive strengths at different ages. And he noticed that we had a kind of fluid intelligence, that's what he called it, fluid intelligence that increases through our 20s and 30s and is at its highest peak around age 39. And then it declines. That's the bad news. Good news coming. But what he showed was that's when people have the best working memory. That's when people have the greatest innovation, creativity, focus, all the things that made you really good at what you do in your 20s and 30s. It gets better and better and better with experience, and then it maxes, and then it starts to decrease. Fluid intelligence goes up until your late 30s and then declines. And that's what the man on the plane experienced, because his accomplishments were in the 60s and 70s. In the 1960s and 1970s. That's what Charles Darwin experienced. That's what many people experience, is the rise and fall of fluid intelligence. But Raymond Cattell, he had very good news, because he showed there's a second kind of intelligence called crystallized intelligence that lies behind and is more important than fluid intelligence. It just uses different skills. Crystallized intelligence does not require a lot of working memory. Thank God, right? You know, when you're my age, I'm 59. When you know, somebody comes up and says, "Hey, man," and I'm like, "What's his name? What's his name? What's his name? What's his name?" And I send my little librarian out to look for his name, the little librarian in here. And he goes back to the back of the stacks, and he goes up looking through the shelves, and he stops for coffee and sits down and rests, and he comes back, and 15 minutes later he says, "That guy's name was Mike. And Mike is long gone, and I look like an idiot." Right? It turns out, you know, for the longest time, neuroscientists, they believed that was a structural degradation of the brain that led to that loss of working memory. That's not right. The truth of the matter is that there's nothing wrong with my brain. There's something wrong with my natural cognitive filing system. There's too much information in my brain at 59 for me to recall things and put memories together quickly. That's the way that it works. My library is too big. Why do my young adult children, why can they come up with information just like that? The answer is because their library has one book, right? That's it. So working memory is not your skill. But you don't need it with crystallized intelligence. See, crystallized intelligence doesn't give you lightning fast horsepower. You don't need the new innovation, the ability to crack a problem all by yourself, to be the star litigator in your law firm. No. It requires wisdom, pattern recognition, teaching ability, mentorship. It requires your ability to take disparate ideas, because you have so many and you have so much knowledge, and put them together into a coherent story. It's funny. At my university, uniformly the best teaching evaluations go to professors over 70. And there's a lot of professors over 70 at Harvard. This is not because the students are merciful. Trust me. No. It's a predatory environment there. The reason is because professors over 70 are much better at pattern recognition and the use of metaphor. They're good at teaching because this reminds them of that. They're able to explain complicated ideas vividly in a way that the students can understand. When young people right out of graduate school come to my university and they ask me, what's the secret to good teaching evaluations? I say, get old. That turns out to be your special skill, and that's crystallized intelligence. Don't worry about working memory, worry about teaching. Go from your innovator curve, which peaks in your late 30s, to your teaching curve, which is increasing through your 40s and 50s and stays high in your 60s and 70s, and even your 80s, and as long as God gives you your marbles. You have crystallized intelligence. It doesn't decline. It's unbelievable. It's funny, you know, I look at different kinds of creative careers. Let me contrast Poets and historians. Poets are pure fluid intelligence because they're innovating with language. Historians are pure crystallized intelligence because they have to know a lot and figure out the story behind all the knowledge. Poets do half of their work on average by age 40, and the first half is the better half. Historians do half of their work by age 67, and the better half is the second half. If you're going to be a historian, take care of your health, don't drink and smoke, because your best books are coming in your 80s, because it's pure crystallized intelligence. And this leads us to the first lesson for people who get happier when they're older. They get on their second curve. What's your second curve? This is why I retired from my CEO job. It's why I walked away. Because I wanted to be completely on my crystallized intelligence curve, which I'm on today. This is my crystallized intelligence curve. I'm talking to you about neuroscience and top-level academic social science, and you're not necessarily scientists. I'm saying things and explaining ideas I could not have explained in my 30s. In my early 30s, I was doing academic research so mathematically sophisticated, I can't read the papers today. It was like it was written by another guy. But today, I have an audience for my column, about 500,000 people a week, and I'm talking about a relatively high-level set of scientific ideas for people who are not scientists. Why? Because my crystallized intelligence curve allows me to explain things better than I ever was able to before. This does not mean that any of you need to go be a professor. No. What it means is that your crystallized intelligence curve exists in the context of your life and God's plan for your life. What is it? If you were a star litigator in your law firm at 30, maybe it's the managing partner at 60. If you were a startup entrepreneur at 35, maybe you should be a venture capitalist at 65, because that's a teaching role. No matter what it is, there's something for you. You just need to find it and get on your second curve. That's practice number one. Here's practice number two of the people who are successful and then happy. They're incredibly good at moving from adding things to their lives to subtracting things from their lives. Now, Mother Nature does not want you to get rid of stuff. Mother Nature says greater success means more, more, more. Years ago, I was doing a lot of trips to Taiwan. I went to Taiwan a lot for state visits and public policy stuff. And every time I went, the people said, in Taiwan, you gotta go see this famous museum. There's a famous museum in Taipei called the National Palace Museum. It's the greatest collection of Chinese art and artifacts in the world. It would take you days or weeks to see the entire collection. It's an incredible thing. And I never had time, so I never went. Well, one time I decided, look, I've got an afternoon. That's not enough time to see it, but I know a lot about how to see museums in a way that you can really appreciate. Here's how to do it if you have limited time. Don't just go by yourself and see as much as possible. If you do that, you'll just kind of walk past stuff, and the only thing you'll remember is the snack bar. That's not how you see a museum. No, hire a guide and ask the guide who's really knowledgeable to explain 10 things to you. That's it. I want to understand deeply 10 things in this museum. You choose what they're going to be. I want to know the history and the philosophy and the provenance, and I want to know the techniques. I want to know everything about these 10 things. So that's what I did. I had like 3 hours. And so this guy rocked my world with information about 10 things in the collection. At one point, he was both an art critic, historian, and philosopher of both Western and Eastern art. And at one point, we were looking at this jade structure, this 2-ton jade sculpture of a Chinese village carved into the side of this jade boulder. And it was amazing, it was beautiful, it was absolutely gorgeous. And I said, it's funny because I would know this is Chinese art even if I'd never been to China. What's the deal? How do I know that, just intuitively? And he said, well, that's a philosophical question. I said, okay, well, tell me more. He said there's a big philosophical difference between Chinese and Western art. I said, explain. He said, when you as a Westerner think of a work of art yet to be started, what's the image that pops into your head? Art not started. And I said, an empty canvas. He said, right. Because you think of art as something that comes from nothing. When I think of a work of art that is yet to be started, I think of an uncut jade boulder Why? Because the work of art is already in there. I just have to expose it by chipping away the jade. That's a philosophical difference, okay? But then he says something that, this is what really caught my attention. It's an interesting distinction about art, but that's not the point. Here's where it really got interesting. He said, that's how you Westerners see success too, and it's different than the way that we do. He said, you think of your life as an empty canvas to fill up with brushstrokes, more paint, more money, more power, more pleasure, more relationships, more prestige, more Instagram followers, more whatever. Bigger Rolodex, more brushstrokes. But here's the thing, he said, when you Westerners, when you get really successful, by about age 45, the canvas is full, and one more brushstroke adds nothing. He said, here's where we're really lucky, because what we think of as a successful life is chipping away the jade until by the end of our lives we expose the beautiful work of art that is our true selves. That had a big impact on me. Why? Because I deal with successful people like you. And I was trying to be a really successful person myself, and that was my problem on the plane that night. My canvas was full, and I was still trying to add brushstrokes to it. And it was dark and dense and not getting better, and I didn't know what to do. What I needed to do was to change my metaphor and start chipping away. That's what happy, successful people do in the second half of their lives, is they go from adding to subtracting. Here's how I explain it to my MBA students at Harvard. Mother Nature tells you that satisfaction comes from having more. You want to know the secret to happiness? More. More of what? More money, more power, more pleasure, more honor, more everything. More. But that's not the secret. The real formula for happiness is all the things that you have divided by the things that you want. Haves divided by wants. Think of the fraction. Numerator haves, denominator wants. There's two ways for you to get greater satisfaction. There's the old inefficient way of have more, or there's the efficient, enduring way of wanting less. Do you have a wants management strategy or just a have more strategy? You need the first. The second isn't good enough. This is important because all successful, happy people figure this out in the second half of their life. If you don't, it's a big problem because you'll never keep up with your wants. You'll never keep up with them. Your wants will always outstrip your haves, and you'll be frustrated. You'll be running. In my business, we call it the hedonic treadmill. Hedonic means feeling. A treadmill is a metaphor. You'll run, and it'll be just resetting, and you'll never be satisfied. There's no satisfaction that comes from having more. You need to temper your wants. And of course, this is the message of the Christian gospel. The idea of wanting less from the world, fewer idols. What are the idols that we serve? Money, power, pleasure, fame. Those are the four idols. And you all have one. We all have one. I teach my students a little game called What's My Idol, where they have to figure out what's the one thing that they don't realize I'm teaching them Christian gospel, by the way, but I'm a spy, basically. So, Andy Stanley's uniformed military. I'm a spy behind the lines. Anyway, so I asked them to figure out, to eliminate the things they don't really care about, and then they come to the idol that will actually beguile them over the course of their lives. And we all have it. Figure it out yourself. Money, power, pleasure, fame, which is your thing. But the more that you try to accumulate that, the less your satisfaction is actually going to be present to you. That's the big problem. So that's the question that we need to answer. What is my strategy to manage my wants? Here's how I do it. Here's how I recommend it. You often hear early in life that you should have a bucket list, right? Take a list of all of your worldly wants and cravings and desires, and you list them, and then you imagine yourself enjoying them, and you're ambitious. But all that does is it inflames your wants. What you really need is a reverse bucket list. A reverse bucket list lists all your worldly cravings and desires, and you move it from kind of the animal portions of your brain to your really human part of your brain, where you say, I might get it and I might not, but I will not be attached to this, and you offer it up. You offer it up. You offer it up to the Lord and say, take this from me as a craving. If it comes to me, fine. If it doesn't, fine. Please, Lord, detach me from these idols. That's how the reverse bucket list works. And anything can be on your reverse bucket list. You know, on my 59th birthday some months ago, I thought to myself, what is my big attachment right now? What's my big problem? And I realized that one of my biggest attachment was to my opinions. Right? This is something that people are very attached to, especially in America today, where 1 in 6 Americans is not talking to a family member because of politics. That's insane. And I thought to myself, am I part of that problem? I think I am. So I listed a bunch of my strongest political opinions, and I crossed them out. Not because I don't believe those things, but because I don't want to be defined by those things. I don't want to be attached to those things, and I don't want to be cut off in communion and love from other people because of those things. I need fewer political opinions because I need more friends. And it worked. I'm free. If you disagree with me, I love you. And I want to talk to you. And I want to learn from you. And I still might think you're wrong. And it's okay if you're wrong or if I'm wrong. You're my sister and you're my brother. And that's what I need. And that's what we need, isn't it? The reverse bucket list for opinions. That's how we can be free. And that's the second skill of successful, happy people in the second half of their lives. They chip away as opposed to adding brushstrokes. They have a reverse bucket list instead of a bucket list. They manage their wants as opposed to managing their haves. What is your wants versus have strategy for this year? What do you need to eliminate? What do you need to get rid of? What do you need to cross out? Do it with love and with confidence and with courage, and you'll get happier. Number 3, this is the third one. This is the most important one, maybe. One of the things that very successful people, that they have, a characteristic that defines them is a vision of themselves, is an identity as a rugged individualist. And I admire that, by the way. That's part of being an American. It really is. You know, there's none of your ancestors came to this country and was on the boat saying, can't wait to get to America where there's a better system of forced income redistribution. That's not what they were saying. No. They're like, I'm going there for opportunity. And opportunity requires that you see yourself as an individual capable of excellence and earned success. That is true, and I admire that very much. But there's a downside to that if that gets too virulent, if it becomes too much of your identity, which is you see yourself only as an individual, and that will cut you off from communion with the people that must be the source of your happiness, that must be around you over the course of your lives. And this is what I see with strivers. Strivers are like a tree in the first psalm, planted by streams of water that prospers in all that he does, whose leaves do not wither. Well, King David in the first psalm was elegizing the virtuous man. Strivers see themselves as the strong tree, isolated perhaps, but steady, strong. You can take shade under it. I remember I was using that metaphor some years ago. I was in Aspen, Colorado, where I spent a lot of time in the summer times. And beautiful tree, the aspen tree with the shimmering yellow leaves in the Rocky Mountain West. Beautiful. And I remember talking about the aspen tree as the metaphor for the striving, successful individual. And a botanist filled me in that I was using the wrong metaphor. And I said, how come? He said, because that's actually not one plant. That aspen tree you're looking at is not one plant. I said, what do you mean? He said, every stand of aspens is actually one plant. It's one root system with different shoots coming out of the same root system. It turns out that the world's largest organism, the largest organism in the history of planet Earth is alive right now. It's a stand of aspen trees in Utah called Pando. 106 acres, 6 million kilograms of wood, one plant. Now, what am I telling you here? You're following the metaphor, I'm sure. If you think that you're one tree and you're an individual, you're gonna be shining your leaves and not paying attention to your true source of health, which is your roots. Look around you. This is you. Look to your family. Look to your friends. Look to your congregation, fellow strivers. Are you gonna cut yourself off from that? You're gonna polish your leaves well into old age? You must fertilize those roots and spend more time doing that. And that's a hard thing for strivers to do. Why? Because I want to rely on me. I want it to be about me. Well, that's the individual tree, which is an illusion of the individual, and you're supposed to figure that out as you get older. Are you polishing your leaves, or are you fertilizing your roots? It's a yes or no question, isn't it? That's the third skill, is that you move from leaves to roots, increasingly as you get older. Now, I ask this question to a lot of people, a lot of strivers that I've talked to, a lot of people that I've done research with, a lot of case studies that I've worked on, why they don't do that. Because most people kind of know that, right? As a matter of fact, everything I've talked about this morning is pretty intuitive. Get on your second curve. Go from the me curve to the we curve, right? You know, the teaching curve. Everybody kind of knows that. People know that you shouldn't be just accumulating and accumulating. You should be chipping away. And most importantly, people know that you should get closer to the people around you as you get older. But they don't do it. They don't do it. I was interviewing a woman for this research, as a matter of fact, an icon of Wall Street, incredibly successful, a billionaire, has a firm named after her. She's incredible. But when you're a happiness specialist, people often, they confess that they're not happy. And that's what she said. I was saying, congratulations on what she said. She said, yeah, but I'm miserable. I said, talk to me. What's wrong? She said, all the things that you talk about. I'm incredibly successful, but all I do is work because that's all I know how to do. I don't think I'm on my game. I think the younger people in my firm, they're starting to doubt my decisions. In the meantime, my husband and I are roommates. I haven't practiced my faith in decades. My adult children and I are cordial to each other at best. I'm going to the doctor and I'm getting bad blood work and I think I drink too much and I need to exercise and I'm not happy. I'm really unhappy. What should I do, professor? I said, you don't need a Harvard professor to tell you what to do. You just wrote your own prescription. Step back from your job, go back to church, go away with your husband, get to know your kids, get into rehab if you're drinking too much, start taking care of your health. Why don't you do that? And she said, I know, I've always known it. I said, so why haven't you made the decision to do that? And she said, and this had a big impact on me. She said, I guess I've always chosen to be special rather than happy. Boom. Have you done that? Have you chosen specialness over happiness even though you know what you're supposed to do? I have. That's what was wrong with me on the plane that night. When I was running that company, that was what was wrong with me. You know how many times I chose the 14th hour in the office before the first hour with my kids when they were little? I did it a lot. And you know what? You know what those little ingrates, you know what they did? You know how they got revenge on me? They grew up. I missed a lot of it. They're grown up now. Now, I get a second chance. I'm a grandfather now. I get a second chance. I'm not missing it. Every single one of them, FaceTime every day, whether they like it or not, right? I live near them. I go see them. Right now I'm living in San Clemente, California for the month because I want to be near my son, my 23-year-old. He's a scout sniper in the US Marine Corps and he's 23 and he's married and I'm not going to miss a minute of it. Why? Because I missed so much before. Because I chose to be special rather than happy and I'm not going to do that anymore. Are you? Are you making that decision? So let's take stock a little bit. What have I told you about? There is a second curve for you, waiting for you. If you miss it, big problems. Get on it. In the meantime, start chipping away as opposed to adding as you get older. And if you're not older yet, make a strategy for doing that. And the earlier you get started, the better. Number 3, it's roots, man. It's not leaves. It's all about your roots. And last but not least, choose to do this as opposed to the specialness that Mother Nature is pushing you toward. Remember, the divine path is toward blissful happiness. And ultimately, the happiness that we'll get, the joy is the beatific vision as we look on the face of the Lord. Get a little taste of it now on looking in the faces of the people that you actually love. Now, I've given you examples of people who blew it. Charles Darwin, man on the plane, me before I did this research. But I can tell you about people who didn't blow it. And let me leave you with one story of somebody who got it right. One thing that Reverend Stanley didn't tell you is about my background. This is not my first career. I was a professional musician all the way through my 20s. I left college when I was 19. I was actually invited by the college to pursue my excellence outside the college. And is generous of them, I thought. And I spent my 20s as a classical musician, as a French horn player, as a matter of fact. My parents called it my gap decade. And I didn't make it back to college till I was 30, as a matter of fact. And all throughout that decade, I did a lot of really interesting things. You know, I toured. I spent a bunch of seasons in the Barcelona Symphony in Spain, which was a wonderful experience. And all the way through my classical music career, I had one favorite composer, somebody whose work really helped my Christian faith and somebody who really helped me understand the nature of beauty, and I couldn't get enough of it. That was Johann Sebastian Bach. Many of you have heard of Bach. I believe Bach is the world's greatest composer. He lived between 1685 and 1750, and in 65 years, he published more than 1,000 pieces of music for all different instrumentations of his time. He also had 20 children, which is productive. And you know, it's funny because Bach had the same kind of experience that Charles Darwin did. Around age 50, the world left him behind. In his 20s and 30s and 40s, he was the most famous composer in Europe for his innovation in the high Baroque, which is the compositional technique of the time. Princes sought him out for commissions. He was the king of the mambo, man. I mean, he was the best composer. And then around age 50, musical styles passed him by. He couldn't keep up. He didn't know why. It's because he was on the wrong curve. His fluid intelligence curve had finished, and his crystallized intelligence curve, and he was trying to be on the wrong curve, and musical styles passed him by, and he wasn't famous anymore. So what did he do? He could have shaken his fist at the heavens. He could have cursed his fate. No, he redesigned his career as the best teacher of his time. Less famous, less rich, to be sure, but he was teaching the organ, he was teaching the chorus, he was writing compositions for every Sunday in the church lectionary. He was an ardent Lutheran. The Lord was the center of his life, and he dedicated his compositional career not to his own success, not to his own fame, not to his own fortune, but rather to the glory of the Lord for the rest of his life, surrounding himself with his many children and grandchildren, his beloved students. He was a portrait of success. A year before he died, a biographer asked him, "Why do you write music?" It's funny because people always ask you what you do, but they never ask you why you do what you do. If they did, what would your answer be? The why question. Here was his answer. The aim and final end of all music is nothing less than the glorification of God and the refreshment of the soul. I heard that when I was 28 years old, and I thought, can I say that? Could I answer that way? I literally left the music business and became a social scientist because I wanted to answer that question like Bach, my hero. Bach pushed me out of music. He made me into the guy who can do this now because I want to glorify God and I want to refresh your souls. That's the whole point of what I do for a living. And Bach died a happy man. Bach died with all the characteristics that I'm talking about here. Bach died on his second curve. Bach died having chipped away the detritus of worldly fame. Bach died surrounding himself with his roots, not polishing his leaves. Bach died happy rather than special, and you can do that too. The name of the book I'm talking about is From Strength to Strength. It's from the 84th Psalm. In Hebrew, Michael el Chael, and it's an ancient Judaic blessing. May you go from strength to strength. And that indeed is the blessing I give you today because you can do that if you offer up these experiences to our Lord and Savior. You share the ideas with others. You can, you will, and I pray that you always will go from strength to strength. God bless you and thank you.